Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric here with Iraq Veteran 8888. All right, we got some more 2A news for you. All right, this one comes out of firearmsnews.com. This article was written by Mr. Mark Chestnut. I've read a couple of his articles in the past. I think they've been pretty well put together, and I really like his opinions, and I like to kind of expand on them myself a little bit. We are going to break into this one. It's entitled, Judge Rules That Bruen Doesn't Protect Felons 2A Rights. This is interesting because we've done a heck of a lot of videos where we talk about felons and guns and how we think that should be handled. And also, we've kind of dove into the marijuana and guns talk a little bit and tried to kind of foster that debate a little bit. So I'm really interested to hear, what Mark has to say about this, and I'm sure I'm going to have some opinions to interject on this as well. So we'll break into this. Before we do, I would like to thank our friends at Arkin Optics for supporting our efforts. They're a great group of people. Their optics are tough as nails. We've torture tested the crap out of them. They've held up so great. And for a long-range precision optic, for the money, I don't think you can ask for anything better on the market right now. They're really rugged, really heavy-duty, very well-made, great reticles. The guys that design these optics have experience sniping in the military. I mean, these guys have put their real-world experience into these optics, and designed the perfect thing. So check them out. Arkin Optics, really patriotic group of people, military veterans, really good people, and tell them we sent you over there. All right, let's get into this. After ruling just a few weeks ago that this summer's Bruen ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court renders the law unconstitutional that disqualifies people under felony indictment from having a gun, that's a mouthful, a federal judge in Texas this week ruled in a different case that the prohibition on convicted felons possessing a firearm remains intact. This is a sensitive subject to a lot of people. Arguing that the ban on felons owning a firearm survives scrutiny under the new standard laid down in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen, Judge David Counts on the U.S. District of Western Texas wrote in his recent ruling. Bruen did shake up the legal landscape, and the court believes that faithfully following Bruen's new framework casts doubt on some firearms regulations, but the regulation in this case is not one of them. Despite finding in the earlier ruling that no laws during the founding era were discovered that dealt with felons' firearms possession, Counts ruled just the opposite in the recent case. Even with the long-standing general concern for public safety, history lacks direct examples about felons specifically, he wrote. But just because there are no straightforward examples does not mean the court's historical inquiry stops there. Interesting. I mean, that's what Bruen says we should do. In truth, there's no indication in the historical record that the authors of the Second Amendment ever intended to ban those convicted of felonies from possessing firearms. That goes double for the current lifetime ban that doesn't allow convicted felons of federal crimes, which includes nonviolent ones, to have their rights restored after serving their sentence and paying their debt to society. Since rights are God-given and recognized by the government, not granted by the government, it's unconstitutional for the government to infringe those rights on a lifetime basis. After all, if one has no freedom after punishment, aren't they still being punished? Such a lifetime ban is another example of Justice Clarence Thomas's contention that courts have been treating the Second Amendment as a second-class right. That's the dang truth. However, Judge Count didn't see it that way, writing, felons are those who have had abused the rights of the people, and as outlined above, this nation has a long-standing tradition of exercising its right as a free society to exclude from the people those who squander their rights for crimes of violence. Consistent with Heller versus Bruen, the Second Amendment should be no different here. Although convicted felons currently lose the right of possessing firearms, ATF uses the word privilege instead of right. Of course they do. A 1965 amendment to the Federal Firearms Act of 1938 allows convicted felons to apply to the ATF for relief from the disability of not being able to possess a gun. However, in 1992, Congress barred the ATF from spending money to review and investigate a felon's application to restore gun rights, leaving those who have served their sentence with little opportunity to have their rights restored outside of a presidential pardon. The U.S. Supreme Court had a chance to right some of these wrongs last year with 3 separate challenges by Americans convicted of nonviolent felonies and looking to have their rights restored reached the high court. Unfortunately, the court chose not to hear any of those challenges, which included such heinous crimes as selling counterfeit cassette tapes and making false statements on tax returns. So this puts us in a really kind of strange bind, right? I can kind of try to see both sides of the equation here and try to arrive at some, resemblance of an answer. It is hard, right? Because there's a lot of people, that have not committed some terrible, heinous crime that would be, something that they should lose their gun rights for the rest of their life. All right. One of the most common ones that I look at are even the misdemeanor domestic violence, right? You get in an argument with your girlfriend when you're 18. Kids are stupid. They do stupid things. I mean, you get a little saucy towards each other. The cops get called. Someone has to go to jail. And look, you're going to get brought up on domestic violence charges one way or the other. It doesn't matter if you hit each other or not. It doesn't matter who hit who. All you know is you're an 18-year-old full of piss and vinegar, and you had an argument with your girlfriend, and things got heated, and someone called the police, and someone has to go to jail. That's just the bottom line. Should that person, for the rest of their adult life, be barred from owning a firearm just because young people are going to be young people? I think that answer is most certainly no, right? Like, that's crazy to have such a strict, prohibition on the Second Amendment for something like that. Now, not every situation is exactly the same. Sometimes it's not just a little minor spat or a minor argument or kids being kids. So it's important to make that distinction that every situation can be treated a little bit differently and uniquely to that specific situation and those specific circumstances. The same could be said about felonies. I mean, you commit a felony, you go to prison, you spend a whole bunch of time in prison, all right, and you're released into society. You can do every single thing in society that you could do before you went to prison except own a gun. I mean, I'm pretty sure you can vote again. Everything else is relatively the same. Now, granted, like if you're applying for a job and they see that you're a felon, they might go, well, we don't want to hire you because you were a felon or whatever, right? There are employers that like to hire felons who, maybe they think that they can be reformed, that they need a chance, right? So there are people on all different sides of the equation that apply how they treat people who have been convicted of felonies in the past. Well, what was it, sir, that you were convicted of? Okay, was it a little bit of tax evasion or some, white collar crime? You didn't hurt anybody. You didn't rape someone. You didn't, commit some crazy armed robbery or literally kill someone or something like that. So, again, the question I've always had when it comes to felons and guns is, if you're free enough to exist in society, are you free enough to own a gun? I mean, if someone cannot be trusted to own a gun, should they even be out of prison? Should they be alive? I mean, if we're really being honest with ourselves about what we want that particular situation to accomplish for society, I mean, I think that's an important thing that we should be asking ourselves here when it comes to this sort of thing. Someone who did commit a heinous, violent, terrible act, right? The most terrible of violent acts that you could ever ask for. And then some lighthearted judge gives them some little puny sentence. And 10, 15, 20, 25 years, however long it is, some period of time later, they're out free in society. Or all these situations in the big cities where you've got, all of these freaking judges are just letting people out of prison. Like they're letting people out of prison. They're doing, no cash bail and all this sort of stuff. And people just get right back out on the streets and start committing the same, crimes over and over and over again, with the general populace having absolutely no recourse. The cops aren't going to show up. You're going to call the police, and there's sometimes, like in New Orleans right now, it's a 2-hour response time for the police to show up. And what you call and they go, well, was someone dead? Well, there might be soon if you don't show up. I mean, people are starting to realize that you've got to be able to protect yourself and look out for your own well-being, right? So as a society, how in the world can we navigate the waters of who isn't or is allowed to own a firearm and under what circumstances when you're just letting criminals out of jail anyway? You're doing cashless bail. You're having all of these sort of progressive, forward type of policies that, aid criminals. And then on the same token, you're trying to pass all of these laws like HR 1808, an assault weapons ban. You're trying to pass, restrictions on people carrying guns. You're trying to pass all these laws to infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens. Criminals don't obey laws already. They don't need your approval or disapproval. They're going to do what they want. They've already made the decision to be a criminal. So what kind of society do we live in where we're going to sit here and pretend like the standard should be, oh, well, if someone's convicted of a felony, when they get out of prison, they shouldn't be able to own a gun, when you're trying to treat people who already own guns like they're criminals. And you're saying they're criminals. The mainstream media says we're criminals. All these social media pundits say we're criminals. They tell us that we're all of these derogatory names. You're a racist. You're a bigot. You're a white supremacist. You're a homegrown national terrorist. They're going to paint you with every single random derogatory term that they possibly can. And that's just a person that legally owns a gun right now who has never even been in trouble a day in their life. That's me, right? Like, they're going to paint me with that brush just by virtue of the fact that I already own guns. They already don't want people to own guns already. So by what standard are we going to say, well, a felon shouldn't own a gun when they've served their debt to society? I mean, what did they do, right? What kind of crime did they commit? Who did they hurt? Who was the victim? I mean, if there's a victim, that's the question we have to ask ourselves. You're going to let these people out of prison and you're going to put them back into society. And if you don't trust them to have a gun, I guess my ultimate question would be, do you trust them to live in society? Now, I'm not going to say what should or shouldn't be done, but that would entail either, well, if they're not safe enough to be in society, you're saying they're not safe enough to have a gun. Well, then why are they safe enough to walk down the street? Why are they safe enough to be around your kids, to walk up behind you in the bank and you don't know that you got a felon behind you? And why is it that we've created this stigma around the word felon when felon doesn't necessarily mean violence? It doesn't mean that you're a violent, terrible person who's committed some terrible, heinous act, right? Felon can go out into a lot of different territory. I think if we're going to be logically consistent with ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, these people that we're saying can't own guns because they're felons, do they need to be in society, period? That's a tough talk. That's not a conversation people want to have. That's a hard conversation to have. I understand that. I get that. But it's important. It's just not logically consistent, right? This judge is cherry picking exactly what they want to cherry pick. They acknowledged that at the time of our founding, that there was nothing in the Constitution or nothing in the Second Amendment or no type of prohibition or law or edict or ordinance or anything that had to do specifically with, all right, how do we handle felons? Well, back then, if you committed a terrible, heinous act, they probably just hung you. You know what I mean? Like, we can't say, well, we have to apply the Bruen standard to this, and we go, well, since we couldn't find anything related to it, it's just strange the way that they were able to kind of coerce that out by saying, well, it's not a felon's right to infringe on the safety of society. Well, if we're using that standard, which it doesn't say anything in the Constitution about that, and it certainly there's no laws or anything in the traditions of the history of our country that point to that. But if you're going to use that line of questioning, then you could also argue that no one has a right to own a gun within the breast of society in general because, oh, well, you don't have a right to infringe on someone's safety. That's the dumbest thing ever. Right? It goes completely against why we have guns, why we have the Second Amendment. So I just think it's strange when you see them come up with these types of terms and the line of thinking that they come up with. It's going to be interesting to see moving forward how a lot of these judges interpret Bruen and how they go back and go, well, gosh, how can we spin this to push our narrative, or how can we spin this to keep things the way they are? We don't want to restore rights. Oh gosh, heck no. That's the way they look at it. So it's just strange. I think society has some very tough and deep questions to answer. And, I'm not going to claim to have all those answers. I certainly don't want to try to shoot in either direction and say, hey, this is how I feel about this or that. I mean, I laid some things out, some very important questions we have to ask ourselves. I know people directly that have been convicted of felonies. Some of my family members are felons, but you know what? They're good people. They didn't do anything crazy or anything like violent, but yet they can't own a gun. Should they be able to own a gun? Yes. Are they safe enough to be walking around in society? Well, one of them has been for the last 35 years. Should he be able to own a gun? Yeah, of course. So I just think there's always going to be a little bit that gets lost in translation and a little bit of nuance that I believe society sometimes isn't capable of completely understanding the gravity of, right? Everything is a case-by-case basis. That's why passing laws is so hard, right? Like, you're going to rely on this rulemaking body to pass laws. Like, Congress is going to, come up with a law and pass a law that has to positively affect the largest group of people positive while negatively affecting people in the least amount possible, right? I mean, like, you wouldn't want to pass a law that was just so terrible that it disenfranchised a huge group of people in some very terrible way. But there can't be a one-size-fits-all law, right? Every situation is a little bit different. And that's why we rely on the courts to help us figure these things out. We hope that we put principled people in the courts that can go, wait a minute, this isn't all what just because the black and white says that you broke the law or you did this. I think it takes principled people to kind of say, you know what, this doesn't really make sense. We need to make an exception for this, or we need to maybe change the law to reflect, what we're dealing with here. So very interesting. I wanted to read that article. I thought it was great. I like Mark's work. So great job on his part. And thank you so much for watching today's video. I want to leave you with those thoughts. Make sure you click the subscription up there and click the notification bell so you're getting all of our videos. We're at like 2.6 million now. So a lot of support. I really appreciate y'all watching the channel. All the years of support. We've been doing this almost 15 years. We've got a lot of great videos on the way. Tons of range stuff, gunsmithing, reloading, more 5 guns, more meltdowns. I promise they're on the way. These videos are a great way for me to keep you guys informed about things I'm seeing and also kind of fill in the blanks in between some of the gunplay and all. I know a lot of people love the gun videos, but understand this stuff's important, and I think it's important to engage the talk over this and to get people talking about it and to get it into our mind, because this is a part of our society, and whether or not we want to admit it, these are questions and issues that we're eventually going to have to figure out. Okay, so anyway, big thank you to everybody that supports my channel. Thank you for watching. Many more videos on the way. We'll see you soon.